For 8 years, retired Navy SEAL Amos Whitlock lived alone, missing the dog who once served beside him. At a winter market, he found a starving German shepherd locked inside a rusted cage. Others mocked the scarred dog, but Amos recognized the eyes of a survivor. He spent his savings to free Flint from a drunken owner and bring him home. Soon, Flint led Amos toward a secret hidden beneath the town's peaceful streets. Together, an aging veteran and a wounded dog fought to expose the men behind it. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to the channel. By 8 in the morning, the snow outside Clearbell had turned bright enough to make a man squint. It lay across the foothills in smooth white sheets, caught in the branches of the pines and settled along the roofs of trucks parked beside the winter exchange market. The sky above Colorado was hard and blue, the kind of clean color that made distance look harmless. Amos Whitlock knew better than to trust anything simply because it looked peaceful. He parked his faded cream-colored pickup near the outer fence and sat behind the wheel for another minute, listening to the engine tick itself quiet. In the inside pocket of his old olive military coat was an envelope containing $2,300. He had built that amount slowly over 2 years, setting aside money from repaired heaters, salvaged copper, and pieces of farm equipment he had restored well enough to sell. The envelope was not his entire savings. Amos had survived too long to spend everything on a single decision. Still, it was more than he had spent on anything for himself in years. His thumb moved over the brass anchor attached to his keyring. The edges had gone smooth with time. Boone used to lift his head whenever he heard those keys. The memory arrived without invitation. A black and tan shepherd lying beside the workshop door, gray around the muzzle. One ear tilted toward the road. Waiting for Amos, even when getting up, had become difficult. 8 winters had passed since Boone died beneath the pine tree behind the cabin. Amos still kept the metal bowl on the porch. He told people he was ready for another dog. He had been telling himself the same thing for nearly 3 years. Amos stepped from the truck, adjusted the carpenter's pencil behind his right ear, and pulled on his brownwork gloves. The winter exchange occupied a wide gravel lot outside town. It was not a proper livestock auction, nor was it a simple flea market. People came to sell old snowplow blades, cracked saddles, table saws, chickens, wood stoves, and sometimes animals they claimed they could no longer keep. The official booths stood beneath striped canvas roofs. Steam rose from paper cups. Country music played from a speaker near the registration shed, thin and cheerful in the cold. A row of polished dog crates attracted the largest crowd. There were red-coated hunting dogs with bright eyes, compact heelers turning in impatient circles, and several German shepherd puppies climbing over one another beneath a wool blanket. Their owners spoke loudly about bloodlines, hips, and trainability. One pup planted both front paws against the wire and barked at Amos. The people nearby laughed. Amos crouched, studied the pup's stance, and let it smell his glove through the bars. It was healthy, bold, and eager. Exactly the kind of animal he had intended to find. The pup reminded him nothing of Boone. That should have been a good thing. Instead, Amos stood and moved on. He passed a young sable shepherd that watched every hand holding food. He passed a heavier male with a broad skull and flawless posture. He passed 2 dogs already trained to sit, heel, and wait with almost mechanical precision. Each time the seller began explaining how quickly the animal would bond. Each time, Amos found a reason not to ask the price. Too young, too excitable, too large for the truck, too much energy for a man with a bad knee. The reasons sounded practical. They were not. Boone had known the sound of Amos's breathing when nightmares woke him. Boone had waited outside the bathroom when an old shoulder wound made lifting his arm difficult. Boone had never needed to be called twice. No dog at the market could know those things. Amos had brought money to buy the impossible, and the morning was beginning to expose him. He left the official row and walked toward the outer parking area, where the snow had been trampled into gray ridges. People sold tools from open tailgates there, beyond the inspection shed and the painted signs listing market rules. A coarse laugh rose from between two trucks. "Won't hunt, won't guard, barely eats." The speaker sat on an overturned crate beside a dented steel cage. Wade Barlow looked older than 51, and younger than whatever his drinking would eventually make him. His face was broad and red around the nose. Brown hair hung in greasy strands beneath a black knit cap. His olive parka bore dark stains along the sleeves, and one hand remained buried inside it around the neck of a small whiskey bottle. A few men stood nearby, amused by something Wade had said. Inside the cage lay a German shepherd. For several seconds, Amos saw only pieces. A narrow rib cage beneath patchy black fur, a tan foreleg drawn tightly beneath the chest, a torn left ear, a pale scar slanting from the right shoulder toward the center of the chest. The dog was too thin, but thinness alone did not stop Amos. Suffering was common enough to become invisible if a man allowed himself. What held him was the dog's position. Its spine was pressed against the rear corner of the cage. From there, it could see Wade's boots, the opening between the trucks, and anyone approaching from the market. It had selected the only place where nothing could come from behind. A man held out a strip of sausage. The shepherd's nostrils moved. It did not reach for the food, not until Wade turned his head. Then the dog leaned forward by less than an inch. Wade noticed and kicked the lower bar with his boot. The metal rang. The shepherd did not bark. It folded inward so quickly that its shoulder struck the cage wall. One of the men laughed. "Looks like you broke that one good." Wade grinned. "Wasn't much there to break." Amos felt no sudden blaze of rage. At his age, anger rarely came like fire anymore. It came like a door closing. He stepped closer. The dog looked not at his face, but at his hands. Amos stopped outside the range of the cage. "What's his name?" he asked. Wade shrugged. "Call him what you want." "Where'd you get him?" "Farm outside Salida." "Which farm?" Wade's grin weakened. "Friend of mine." "You have the transfer papers?" Wade reached into his coat and produced a folded sheet stained at one corner. Amos took it without touching Wade's fingers. The paper contained no veterinary record, no microchip number, and no previous owner's address. A name had been signed at the bottom in handwriting that did not match the rest. "Vaccination history?" Amos asked. "He's a dog, not a senator." One of the men chuckled. Amos kept reading. Wade leaned forward. Whiskey and stale tobacco rode his breath. "You buying or wasting my time?" Amos looked at the shepherd again. The animal's eyes were amber, darker around the rim. They were not pleading. Amos almost wished they were. Pleading would have been simpler. The dog watched him with the exhausted calculation of something that no longer expected kindness to remain kind. "How much?" Amos asked. "600. A murmur moved through the onlookers. Someone said, "For that skeleton?" Wade kicked the cage again, lighter this time, as if demonstrating merchandise. The dog's eyes closed before the sound came. That was the moment Amos understood. Not because he had been a SEAL, not because war had granted him some sacred knowledge unavailable to other men. He understood because he had spent years around creatures, human and otherwise, who learned to react before pain arrived. The shepherd had not flinched from the kick. It had flinched from Wade's decision to kick. Amos folded the paper. "I want the chip scanned." Wade snatched the sheet from his hand. "No chip." "Then scanning won't cost you anything." "I said no." Wade stood. His movements carried the clumsy speed of a man trying to appear more sober than he was. He reached for the cage handle. The shepherd's head dropped. Amos took out his phone. Wade's face changed. "Who are you calling?" "County Animal Control." "That dog is mine." "Then you can prove it." Wade pulled the cage several inches across the snow. The bottom scraped the gravel, and the dog slid against the bars. Amos stepped into the narrow space between Wade and the nearest truck. At 5'9", with a bent back and a right knee that disliked cold mornings, he did not look like the men he had once served beside, but he knew how to occupy a doorway. Wade stopped. "You threatening me, old man?" "No." Amos's voice remained quiet. "I'm keeping you here long enough to finish the conversation." For the first time, the men nearby were not laughing. The dog watched Amos's left glove. Amos kept both hands visible. Ruth Delaney arrived 12 minutes later in a county utility vehicle with amber lights on the roof. She stepped out wearing an olive service coat, dark cargo trousers, and heavy snow boots. Her dark blonde hair was braided down her back, and an orange control lead hung in a neat coil from her belt. Ruth did not waste time asking who was upset. She looked first at the cage, then at the dog, then at Wade. "Paperwork," she said. Wade began explaining before she finished the word. Ruth listened with the expression of someone who had heard every version of a lie and still intended to document this one correctly. She photographed the cage, the dog's visible injuries, the paper, and Wade's identification. When she asked for proof of ownership, Wade offered the handwritten form. "This does not establish lawful possession," Ruth said. "He was given to me." "By whom?" Wade named a man but could not provide a number or address. Ruth knelt several feet from the cage. She did not make eye contact with the shepherd. She studied its breathing and the raw line around its neck. "This animal needs veterinary evaluation," she said. "I'm placing him under temporary county hold pending ownership verification." Wade swore. The shepherd pressed deeper into the corner. Amos felt the envelope inside his coat. He knew Wade could not legally sell the dog. He also knew a drunk man with a cage, and no conscience might leave before Ruth completed the seizure paperwork, turning a bad situation into a chase through a crowded market. Amos withdrew $300. Wade stared at the bills. "What's that?" "Consideration for staying here, signing that you surrendered temporary custody, and answering her questions." Ruth glanced at Amos. "Every dollar goes in the report," she said. "This is not a purchase." "I know." Wade hesitated, then took the money. The exchange felt ugly. Amos wanted it to feel noble. It did not. It felt like paying a toll at the gate of another living creature's misery. But Wade remained. He signed. Ruth completed the hold. The county shelter was full from a burst pipe and 2 recent neglect cases. When Amos offered to foster the dog during the investigation, Ruth studied him carefully. "You understand, this does not make him yours." "Yes." "If we locate a legal owner, he may be returned." Amos's jaw tightened. "I understand." Ruth looked toward the shepherd. "Do you?" The question followed Amos all the way to the truck. They could not safely place the dog in the cabin. Ruth helped secure the cage in the covered section of the truck bed, blocked from the wind by Amos's steel toolbox and several folded tarps. Before Ruth left, she handed him a temporary foster document and the address of Laurel Fenwick's veterinary clinic. "Straight there or straight home?" she said. "No stops." Amos nodded. He opened the rear door of the cab and took out an old wool blanket. Boone's blanket. It was gray, worn thin at one corner, and still held a few black hairs buried deep in the weave. Amos had washed it many times, but memory did not depend entirely on scent. He placed it carefully inside the cage. The shepherd froze. Its nose moved once. Then it gathered what little strength it had and dragged itself to the opposite side, pressing its body against the cold metal to get away from the blanket. Amos stood with one hand on the tailgate. The rejection struck deeper than it should have. For one disloyal instant, he had believed that an old smell might bridge 8 years. That Boone's blanket might tell this injured animal what kind of man Amos was, that the past could introduce him and spare him the work of becoming trustworthy again. The dog would not allow it. Amos reached in slowly and removed the blanket. "Fair enough," he said. The shepherd watched his hands. Amos folded the blanket and placed it on the passenger seat, where Boone used to sit before age made climbing difficult. He drove away from the market beneath a sky so bright it made the snow look endless. In the mirror he could see only part of the cage and one amber eye between the bars. Amos had gone to Clearbell expecting to bring home a dog that might fit into an old life. Instead, he carried a stranger who wanted nothing from him, trusted nothing he owned, and refused even the comfort of his happiest memory. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, beneath the ache, Amos felt the first honest thing he had felt all morning: relief. The shepherd was not Boone, and for the first time Amos understood that this was not the tragedy. It was the beginning. The first night the dog did not sleep. Neither did Amos. He left the kitchen light burning low and sat in the worn armchair near the stove, pretending to read an old hardware catalog while the German shepherd watched him from beneath the dining table. The dog had chosen the narrowest space in the house, its back pressed against the wall. Its head rested between its forelegs, but its amber eyes remained open. The temporary county lead was still clipped to the collar because Ruth Delaney had warned Amos not to reach across the dog's body until it had been properly examined. Every few minutes, the stove made a hollow click as the metal expanded. Each time, the dog's shoulders tightened. Amos did not speak. He had learned during long nights at sea that silence could be useful when nothing honest was ready to be said, but the silence in the cabin was different. It did not belong to two men sharing watch. It belonged to two creatures listening for dangers that were no longer there. At 3 a.m, Amos placed a bowl of water near the table and returned to his chair. The dog waited until Amos turned his face toward the window before crawling forward to drink. By dawn, the water was gone. The food remained untouched. For the next 2 days, they developed a life made mostly of distance. Amos walked slowly around the cabin, announcing ordinary actions before making them. Stove. Door. Coming past. He felt foolish the first dozen times. Then he noticed the dog no longer flinched whenever Amos crossed the kitchen. The progress was so small it would have been invisible to anyone impatient. Amos was impatient. That was the problem. On the 3rd morning, he stood near the back door and gave the command Boone had known better than his own name: heel. The dog stared at him. Amos repeated it with a firmer tone: heel. The shepherd lowered its head and shifted its weight backward. A sour irritation rose in Amos before he could stop it. Boone would already have been at his left side, shoulder aligned with Amos's knee, waiting for the next instruction. "This isn't difficult," Amos muttered. The dog's ears flattened. The words struck Amos almost as soon as they left him. He looked away first. Outside, the wind dragged loose snow across the porch. Boone's old metal bowl sat beside the wall, its bottom filled with a thin crust of ice. Amos opened the door without asking the dog to follow. It remained beneath the table. That afternoon he moved the bowl into the shed. He told himself it was because the metal might split in the cold. The lie was not particularly convincing. The mistake with the whistle happened the following morning. Amos had gone into the workshop to repair a brass lighter someone had left in a box of scrap. When he returned to the kitchen, the shepherd was not beneath the table. For one wild second, Amos thought it had escaped. Then he saw the tip of a black tail behind the pantry door. Without thinking, Amos placed 2 fingers between his lips and gave the short, rising whistle he had used for Boone for nearly 15 years. The reaction was immediate. The dog burst from behind the pantry, not toward Amos, but away from him. Its shoulder struck a chair hard enough to overturn it. The animal slid across the floor, scrambling for traction, then wedged itself into the corner beside the stove. It shook without making a sound. Amos stood perfectly still. The whistle seemed to remain in the room after the sound had ended. He remembered Boone charging across fields at that signal, ears forward, tongue hanging from one side of his mouth. This dog had heard something else. Not a summons. A warning. Amos went to the bedroom and opened the top drawer of the dresser. Beneath old service papers lay Boone's small steel training whistle on a faded cord. He held it for a moment. Then he carried it to the workshop, placed it in a wooden box, and locked the box inside a cabinet. When he returned, the shepherd was still in the corner. Amos righted the chair without approaching. "That one's gone," he said. The dog did not understand the words, but it watched Amos leave the room rather than follow it. Laurel Fenwick's veterinary clinic occupied a converted feed store near the northern end of Clearbell. The building had green trim, frosted windows, and a brass bell over the door that Amos silenced with one gloved hand before entering. Laurel met them in a side examination room to avoid the noise of the waiting area. She was 52, small and quick, with red-brown hair threaded with silver and tied low at the nape of her neck. Round amber-colored glasses gave her a scholarly appearance until she rolled up her sleeves and began working with the efficiency of someone who had no patience for avoidable suffering. She did not put the dog on the examination table. Instead, she sat on a low stool and allowed it to remain on the floor. "What have you called him?" she asked. "Nothing yet." "That may be wise." Amos looked down at the dog. "He doesn't answer to anything." Laurel glanced over the top of her glasses. Not answering and not listening are different things. The examination took nearly an hour. The shepherd was underweight and dehydrated. Several old injuries had healed poorly, including damage around the right hip and a fracture near the tail. The pale line across its chest was an old laceration, not a surgical scar. The fur around the neck had thinned where a narrow restraint had repeatedly rubbed the skin. Laurel's hands remained gentle, but her face hardened as the list grew. "This dog has been surviving for some time," she said. "That is not the same as living." She scanned the usual implantation area for a microchip. Nothing. Then she scanned along the shoulders, ribs, and chest. A faint electronic chirp sounded near the lower edge of the breastbone. Laurel paused. "There you are." An X-ray showed the chip had migrated far from its typical position. Laurel could not yet say whether it had been inserted badly, disturbed by injury, or manipulated. The number connected to an old registration under an address no longer occupied, and a telephone line disconnected years ago. "There may still be a lawful owner," Laurel told Amos. "The county will have to follow the trail." Amos folded his arms. "And if they find one?" "Then the ownership question is not yours to decide." The dog sat close to the door, watching Laurel's fingers. Amos felt an unreasonable tightening beneath his ribs. He had known this before agreeing to foster. Ruth had said it plainly. The dog was not his. Still, knowledge was easier when it remained theoretical. Laurel noticed the change in his face. "You have had him 4 days," she said. "That doesn't mean I want him returned to whoever did this." "No, but wanting to protect him does not automatically make every previous person guilty." Amos disliked the sentence because it was fair. Laurel handed him a printed feeding schedule, medication, and the name of a behavioral specialist. "Dr. Tessa Harrow works with trauma cases," she said, "including retired working dogs." "I've trained dogs." "I know." Her voice was kind enough to make the answer more irritating. "You trained dogs to perform tasks. This one first needs to learn that ordinary life is not a task he can fail." Tessa came to the cabin 2 days later. She arrived without a clipboard and without trying to touch the dog. At 48, she had a narrow, weathered face and dark hair cut in an uneven bob, silver showing at one temple. A leather bracelet circled her wrist, stamped with 3 words Amos noticed only when she removed her gloves. "Choice builds trust." Tessa sat sideways on the kitchen floor, facing the wall rather than the shepherd. The dog watched her from beneath the table. Amos waited for her to do something. She did not. After several minutes, she slid a piece of dried meat across the floor, not toward the dog, but into the open space between them. The shepherd looked at the food, then at Amos, then at Tessa's hands. It did not move. Tessa nodded as though it had answered a question. "He is not refusing food," she said. "He is calculating the price." "What price? What happens after he takes it?" Amos leaned against the counter. "I have not hurt him." "He doesn't know that yet." Tessa studied the kitchen. The metal bowl in the shed had left a pale ring on the porch boards. Boone's photograph stood on the shelf beside Amos's service medals. "What words did you use with your old dog?" "Sit, down, stay, heel, come." "Stop using all of them." Amos stared at her. "For how long?" "Until this dog stops hearing every command as a test." "He needs structure." "Yes, but structure and control are not the same thing." Tessa asked Amos to create new signals for simple routines. A hand lowered gently for settling, a touch to his own chest before approaching, a soft verbal marker for food. No whistle, no sharp correction, no command repeated louder because it failed the first time. "You are going to hate this," Tessa said. "Why?" "Because you will have to wait for him to choose things you could once make another dog do." The statement landed with more accuracy than Amos appreciated. For the next week, Amos practiced restraint. He sat several feet from the food bowl while the dog ate. He opened the back door, stepped aside, and allowed the shepherd to decide whether to cross the threshold. He stopped reaching for the collar whenever he felt nervous. Progress came without ceremony. The dog drank while Amos remained in the room. Then it accepted a piece of meat from the floor near his boot. Then it slept for nearly 20 minutes with both eyes closed. The name came on a cold afternoon in the workshop. Amos was repairing an old Flint wheel lighter for Calvin Dorsey, the owner of a diner in town. He had removed the tiny stone and spring when the flint slipped from his stiff fingers. It struck the concrete and gave off a brief spark. The shepherd, lying near the heater vent, lifted its head, not in fear, in attention. Amos picked up the tiny gray stone. "Flint," he said quietly. The dog's right ear moved. Amos waited, then repeated the word. "Flint." This time the dog looked directly at him. The eye contact lasted no more than a second. It was enough. "Well," Amos said, "you've ignored worse names." The shepherd lowered its head again, but the tension around its mouth seemed to ease. From then on, the name belonged to him. Not as an order, as an invitation. By the middle of February, Flint could tolerate short trips in the covered bed of the pickup without pressing himself into the farthest corner. Amos lined the space with clean straw and secured the door so Flint could see him through the rear window. They began traveling through Clearbell on salvage rounds. Amos collected copper pipe from repair shops, broken appliances from porches, and rusted farm parts from barns. Flint followed on a long lead when the ground was safe, wearing a quilted olive coat Ruth had found in the county supply room. Their first stop was the home of Mavis Ketter, a 68-year-old widow who lived in a yellow house near the post office. She was small and round, with white hair curling around her ears and a burgundy scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Her kitchen pipe had frozen. Amos crawled beneath the sink while Mavis talked continuously above him. Flint remained near the doorway. When Mavis stepped backward toward the icy porch, Flint moved between her and the top step. He did not touch her. He simply occupied the space. Mavis looked down. "Well," she said, "at least one of you has manners." Amos struck his head on the underside of the sink. Mavis laughed for nearly a minute. Later, outside Calvin's diner, they found an elderly hound trembling beside the wall while its owner repaired a flat tire. Flint approached slowly and lay several feet away, placing his body between the hound and the wind. It was not dramatic. No one applauded. Amos pretended not to notice how long Flint remained there. After that, small habits began forming. Flint picked up a wrench Amos dropped, but would not release it until Amos traded him half a biscuit. He stole only the left glove from each pair and hid them beneath the passenger seat. He watched Amos's footsteps on icy ground with more attention than he watched passing strangers. One afternoon, returning from a salvage yard, they drove behind the winter market. The storage buildings stood in a line beyond the fence, their tin roofs shining beneath fresh snow. Flint rose in the truck bed. His body changed before he made a sound. Head lowered, nose lifted. Weight shifted forward, then suddenly back. He stared toward the third warehouse from the end. Amos slowed the truck. Flint did not bark or pull at the secured lead. He only watched the building until it disappeared behind them. The next day, on the same road, it happened again, and again 2 days later. Amos told himself Flint remembered Wade's smell, the cage, or the market noise. That explanation was reasonable. It was also incomplete. At home that evening, Amos found his missing left glove beneath the dining table. Flint lay nearby, awake but no longer pressed against the wall. Amos sat in his chair and placed the glove on his knee. "You're a strange thief," he said. Flint closed his eyes. For the first time since arriving, he fell asleep before Amos did. The cabin remained quiet, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer something each of them guarded alone. It had become a place they were beginning to share. The sun made the snow behind the Clearbell winter market look cleaner than it was. By mid-afternoon, the roofs of the storage buildings shone white beneath a brittle blue sky, while the ground between them had been churned into gray slush by truck tires, boots, and leaking machinery. Amos had come to collect a lot of broken heaters from the third warehouse. The owner had called that morning and offered him 12 units for scrap, most of them rusted through at the base and not worth repairing. Amos had agreed, because copper coils did not care how ugly the machine around them had become. Flint rode in the covered truck bed, wearing the quilted olive coat Ruth had found for him. He no longer pressed himself into the far corner during every drive, though he still watched the rear window whenever the truck slowed. When Amos opened the tailgate, Flint stepped down without being asked. That alone would have pleased Amos a week earlier. Today, Flint barely looked at him. The dog's attention had fixed on the line of storage buildings. Amos clipped on the long lead and let Flint choose the pace. They passed a stack of snow tires, a collapsed wooden pallet, and a row of dented cages leaning against the warehouse wall. Flint stopped, not with the curious paws he used for animal tracks, not with the alert posture he took when strangers approached. His body simply became rigid. His nose pointed toward a black tarp trapped beneath several lengths of scrap pipe and 2 warped cage doors. His tail lowered, and one forepaw hovered just above the ground. Amos followed the line of Flint's gaze. Nothing moved beneath the tarp. No sound came from it. The temptation to lift it was immediate. So was the memory of Hollis Mercer's type of man, though Amos had not yet met him. Someone who would ask where Amos had stood, what he had touched, what he had disturbed, and why he had believed good intentions made any of that harmless. Amos stepped back. "Easy," he said. Flint did not look at him. Amos took out his phone and called Ruth Delaney. She answered on the 4th ring. "If this is another frozen raccoon, I'm charging you for the drive." "It isn't." Something in his tone erased the humor from hers. "What have you got?" "I don't know yet." Flint's reacting to a cupboard pile behind the 3rd warehouse. "There are cages." "Do not touch anything." "I know." "Amos." "I said I know." Ruth arrived first, her county vehicle throwing a spray of slush as it turned behind the building. Sheriff Odessa Crane came 6 minutes later in a dark SUV with snow crusted along the wheel wells. Odessa stepped out wearing a brown olive sheriff's coat and a green knitted scarf tucked neatly at the collar. Her steel-gray hair brushed her jaw when the wind shifted. She carried a small black notebook in one hand and surveyed the scene before acknowledging Amos. "What has been moved?" she asked. "Nothing." "What did the dog touch?" "Ground, snow, air." Odessa looked at him over the top of the notebook. "That last one will be difficult to bag." Ruth snorted. Amos did not. Odessa crouched near the cages, careful to place her boots in existing tracks. Flint backed away when she came closer, but he did not pull. Amos loosened the lead and stood beside him without touching. Ruth photographed the pile from several angles. Only then did Odessa lift the edge of the tarp using a gloved hand. The first object beneath it was so small Amos almost missed it. A brass tag lay half embedded in frozen dirt. No collar. No chain. Just the tag. Its surface had been scratched, and one edge carried a shallow crescent-shaped dent. Nearby lay a strip of blue nylon leash with a faded veterinary logo, 2 metal collar buckles tangled with short clumps of fur, and a gray handheld microchip reader with the battery panel missing. Odessa's expression did not change. Ruth's did. "Someone kept tools here," she said. "Or dumped them here," Odessa replied. Beneath a heater casing they found a pharmacy invoice folded into quarters. Water had blurred some of the ink, but the product line remained readable. Veterinary sedative, 20-dose vial. The purchaser's name had been torn away. Amos felt Flint shift beside him. The dog was staring at the brass tag, not approaching it, not sniffing, staring. "Does he recognize it?" Ruth asked. No way to know. Amos heard the reluctance in his own voice. He wanted Flint's reaction to mean something precise. He wanted the dog to hand them certainty, as if suffering might become useful enough to justify itself. Instead, Flint only stood in the snow, trembling once along the shoulders. Odessa found the phone last. It was wedged beneath a bent cage panel, its screen broken into a spider web of black cracks. Mud had entered the charging port. One corner of the case was melted. "Could be nothing," Odessa said. "Could be enough," Ruth replied. Odessa placed it in an evidence bag. "That depends on whether someone smarter than the 3 of us can make it speak." Flint finally turned away from the pile. Amos took him back toward the truck, while Odessa marked the area with tape. He noticed the dog had begun licking his lips repeatedly, a nervous habit Tessa had warned him about. "You did enough," Amos murmured. The words surprised him. He had not asked Flint to find anything. Still, some part of him had already begun treating the dog's pain like a map. That realization sat badly in his chest. Mavis Ketter arrived before sunset wearing her burgundy scarf and carrying a tin of peppermint candies she offered to everyone except Amos, whom she claimed had the disposition of a fence post and no need for fresh breath. Odessa had called because the faded logo on the leash belonged to the clinic where Mavis had once taken Jasper, the hound she lost 3 winters earlier. Mavis approached the evidence table set up inside the warehouse office. Her usual humor disappeared when she saw the brass tag through the clear plastic bag. She did not touch it. Her hand rose to her mouth, then dropped. "That's his." Odessa remained gentle but precise. "How can you tell?" "The dent." Mavis leaned closer. "My husband made a little press in our garage. I dropped Jasper's tag under it the week after we bought it. Left that mark right there." Her fingertip hovered above the crescent in the brass. "He should have had a new one. I kept saying I'd replace it." Her voice did not break. That made the grief worse. Odessa asked for photographs, veterinary records, and any old receipts that might help establish ownership. Mavis nodded through every question. Amos stood near the door with Flint. He remembered Mavis telling him Jasper had probably followed deer tracks into the foothills during a storm. She had told the story so many times it had become a kind of mercy. Now, a small dent in a piece of metal had taken that mercy away. Mavis looked at Flint. "Did he find it?" "He stopped near the pile." "That is not what I asked." Amos glanced down at the dog. "Yes?" Mavis nodded slowly. Then she placed one peppermint on the table beside the evidence bag. Odessa raised an eyebrow. "For Jasper," Mavis said. "He hated those." No one laughed. But Amos almost did, and the almost laughter hurt in a clean, human way. The next morning, Odessa called from the sheriff's office and asked Amos to come in. The office occupied a low brick building near the municipal garage. Inside, the heat ran too high, and the air smelled of paper, wet wool, and burnt coffee. Odessa introduced him to investigator Hollis Mercer. Hollis was 49, tall and lean, with narrow shoulders beneath a dark olive wool coat. His ash-brown hair was combed to one side, silver showing at the temples, and rectangular black glasses sat low on a face made tired by more reading than sleeping. He carried an old leather case covered in colored labels. He did not greet Flint. He did not distrust him either. That distinction mattered to Amos more than it should have. Hollis opened a folder. "The tag appears consistent with Mrs. Ketter's records. The leash fragment matches the clinic branding used during the same period. The sedative invoice came from a distributor serving 4 counties. "So we have a connection," Amos said. "We have several objects found in one place." Hollis adjusted his glasses. "A connection is what we prove after we know who possessed them, when they arrived, and why. Flint reacted to that warehouse 3 times. I understand. You don't sound impressed." "I am not supposed to be impressed." Hollis spoke without contempt. That made him harder to dismiss. "A dog's behavior may tell us where to look. It does not tell a court what happened." Amos folded his arms. "Nothing tells a court anything if no one bothers looking. That is why I am here." For a moment the room held the quiet hostility of 2 men who disliked each other's methods because each recognized something necessary in the other. Hollis opened another file. The phone was damaged, but preliminary recovery produced several photographs. He turned the screen of a tablet toward Amos. The first image showed the interior of a dark cargo van. 3 cages were stacked along one wall. In the nearest, a black dog pressed its nose through the bars. The second image showed 2 German shepherds on a concrete floor beneath fluorescent lights. The third had been taken through a dirty windshield. Snow covered the edges of a loading dock. Amos leaned closer. A partial sign was visible in the background. Not enough to identify the place. Enough to prove there had been more than one dog. Hollis watched Amos's face. "Do you recognize anything?" "No." "Does the dog?" Amos looked at Flint, who lay beneath the chair with his head on his paws. "No," Amos said, "and we are not showing him photographs until Tessa says it is safe." Hollis's expression shifted slightly. Approval, perhaps, or surprise. "Good," he said. That night, Flint dreamed. The first sign was the movement of his legs beneath the blanket. Small at first, then faster, as if he were running without leaving the floor. A low sound gathered in his throat. Amos rose from the armchair. Flint's muzzle tightened. His teeth caught the edge of the blanket and held. Amos almost reached down. His hand stopped halfway. Tessa had told him never to wake a frightened dog by touch unless there was immediate danger. So Amos sat on the floor several feet away. He waited. Flint's breathing came hard, then broke into a thin whine. Amos looked toward Boone's photograph on the shelf. "I pushed him too long," he said quietly. Flint's ears moved, though his eyes remained closed. Boone slowed down near the end. I saw it. Pretended I didn't. Amos rubbed his thumb over the bent joint of his left little finger. "I took him on a salvage run after Laurel told me to keep him home." He collapsed beside the truck. The memory had not improved with age. I told myself he wanted to come. Maybe he did. Maybe he only came because I asked. Flint's jaw loosened from the blanket. Amos kept talking, not because the dog understood the story, but because truth sometimes needed a living witness even when language was wasted. "I went to that market looking for something to fill the quiet." His voice roughened. "That was not fair to you." Flint opened his eyes. He did not crawl closer. He did not place his head on Amos's knee. He simply shifted onto his side and settled with his chest facing the old man instead of the wall. The gesture was small enough to disappear if turned into a miracle. Amos let it remain small. The following afternoon, Hollis called again. 7 identifying tags and microchip references had now been connected to missing dog reports across 3 towns. The date stretched back nearly 4 years. Some of the reports had been classified as lost animals. Others had never moved beyond handwritten notes at local clinics. No single item proved a network. Together, they formed a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. Amos stood at the kitchen window with the phone against his ear. Outside, snow fell in thin, straight lines. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "We do not know." "How many dogs?" "We do not know that either." Hollis paused. "But this is no longer an isolated neglect case." Amos looked across the room. Flint was awake beneath the table, facing him, not hiding, watching. On the floor beside the dog lay Amos's missing left glove. Hollis continued speaking about warrants, records, and jurisdiction. Amos heard only part of it. The rest of his attention remained on the dog who had once been trapped inside a cage at the edge of a market, carrying memories no one could question, and evidence no one could ask him to explain. The objects beneath the tarp had been silent. Flint was silent too. Yet together they had disturbed something Clearbell had mistaken for ordinary. And ordinary, Amos knew, was often only the name people gave to a wrong that had gone unchallenged for too long. The pattern did not reveal itself all at once. It emerged in small, ugly repetitions. A retriever vanished near a gas station outside Clearbell after its owner stopped to pay inside. A cattle dog disappeared from behind a tavern in Bellwether, though the gate had remained latched. 2 shepherds were reported missing from fenced properties beside roads with no working traffic cameras. Odessa pinned every report to a board in the sheriff's office. Hollis added dates, vehicle descriptions, weather conditions, and distances from the nearest market or highway entrance. Laurel reviewed veterinary records. Tessa read witness statements for details other people overlooked. Amos sat at the end of the table with Flint beneath his chair. He had expected crime to look more organized. Instead, it looked like a series of ordinary places connected by other people's failure to notice. Gas pumps, parking lots, back alleys behind bars, fences beside quiet roads. Hollis marked 3 reports with a blue pen. These owners mentioned a whistle. Odessa leaned closer. "Same kind?" "Short, high, 2 notes in most accounts." "One woman thought it came from a truck," Laurel said. Another thought someone was calling a hunting dog, Hollis replied. No one considered it important at the time. Amos looked down. Flint was awake. At the word whistle, his breathing had changed, only slightly. But Amos noticed now. Tessa noticed too. She closed the file. We do not test anything here. Hollis looked at her. I did not suggest we should. You were about to. I was about to ask whether the sound could be reconstructed. That is not the same as playing it beside him. Amos appreciated the correction more than he admitted. 2 days later, Tessa arranged a controlled session at the county animal center. The room was large, quiet, and almost empty. Rubber mats covered the floor. The door remained open to a fenced outdoor run. Flint wore a harness attached to a long line, though Amos held it loosely enough that the dog would not feel trapped. Tessa had recorded several whistle patterns based on the witness accounts. She set the speaker outside the room, beyond Flint's line of sight, and lowered the volume until Amos could barely hear it. Before beginning, she looked at him. You stop this the moment he cannot recover. How will I know? You will want to keep going because you want an answer. Her eyes did not leave his. That will be how you know. The first sound produced no visible response. Flint glanced toward the door and then back at Amos. The second made one ear twitch. The third was 2 short notes, the second slightly higher than the first. Flint dropped close to the floor. His head swung toward the exit. His mouth opened, but no bark came. He moved behind Amos so quickly that the lead wrapped once around the old man's boot. Amos crouched. Flint did not press against him for comfort. He used Amos's body as cover. There was a difference. Tessa stopped the recording. No more. Hollis, standing behind the glass observation panel, wrote something in his notebook. Amos remained still until Flint's breathing slowed. What does it prove? He asked. Nothing legal, Hollis said through the open door. Amos turned sharply. Tessa answered before the argument could begin. It suggests the sound had meaning for him. Not what meaning, not who used it, not when. Flint lowered his nose to Amos's coat sleeve. Amos felt the smallest touch of breath against the worn olive fabric. That brief contact carried more weight than the entire test. The dog had heard something from his old life, and he had chosen Amos as the nearest wall. 3 days later, Hollis found the video. It came from an exterior camera at a gas station 26 miles south of Clearbell. The recording was nearly 2 years old and had been saved only because the station owner kept archived footage after several fuel thefts. The image quality was poor. Snow blurred the bottom of the frame. Headlights washed the rest in pale glare. Hollis gathered Odessa, Laurel, Tessa, and Amos's in the small conference room at the sheriff's office. Flint remained at home. Tessa had insisted. The video showed a livestock transport van parked beside a service road. A man opened the rear doors. A thin German shepherd jumped down. Even in the grainy image, Amos recognized the uneven left ear and the slight bend near the end of the tail. Flint wore a long line attached to a narrow collar. The man remained behind the van, holding the other end. Across the road, a black and white dog stood behind a low fence. It barked once, then moved closer. Flint did not bark back. He lowered his body and turned sideways, presenting no threat. The other dog squeezed through a gap beneath the fence. It crossed the road. Flint backed toward the van. The black and white dog followed. Then 2 men moved into the frame. One threw a looped pole over the dog's neck. The other grabbed Flint's line and dragged him backward. The captured dog struggled. Flint twisted once toward it before someone struck his side with a boot. The video had no sound. It did not need any. Amos watched the clip a second time. Then a third. On the fourth, Tessa reached forward and closed the laptop. That is enough. Amos looked at her. You do not get to decide that. I just did. Hollis removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We cannot identify the men from this footage." "But you can identify Flint," Amos said. "Probably." "Probably?" "The ear, tail, coat pattern, and body shape are consistent. Laurel can compare old injury locations, but probably is what we say until evidence earns a stronger word." Amos pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped against the floor. Odessa watched him carefully. "What are you angry at?" she asked. "The men." "That was not my question." Amos left without answering. At home, Flint met him near the kitchen. Not close, never close at first. The dog stood several feet away and waited for Amos to set down his keys. Usually Amos spoke before removing his coat. That evening he said nothing. Flint followed him into the workshop. Amos kept seeing the other dog step through the fence. He saw Flint backing toward the van. He saw the trust between two animals being turned into a trap. The facts were simple. Flint had been controlled. Flint had been struck. Flint had likely been starved, threatened, and trained through fear. Amos understood all of it. Understanding did not stop the image from hardening inside him. At supper, he placed Flint's bowl near the wall and sat at the table instead of on the floor. Flint waited. Amos kept his eyes on his own plate. After several minutes, the dog ate. The room felt colder than it had the night before. Later, Flint took Amos's left glove from the bench and carried it toward the bedroom. "Leave it." The command came out sharp. Flint stopped. Amos stood and reached for the glove. Flint did not resist, but Amos pulled harder than necessary. The leather slipped free. Flint recoiled as if struck. He moved beneath the dining table and pressed his back to the wall. The old position, the first position. Amos stared at him. Shame arrived quickly. It did not soften him. It made him defensive. "You knew what you were doing," he muttered. The sentence sounded wrong the instant it entered the room. Flint's ears lowered. Amos turned away. For 2 days the distance remained. He fed Flint, walked him, checked his water, and followed every instruction Tessa had given. He did nothing obviously cruel. That almost made it worse. Care continued. Trust did not. Mavis noticed on the third morning. She had asked Amos to repair the hinge on her shed door. Snow glittered along the garden fence, and Flint lay beneath the porch awning while Amos worked. Mavis watched them from the doorway, burgundy scarf tucked into her coat. "What did he do?" she asked. Amos tightened a screw. "Nothing." "Then what did you do?" He looked up. Mavis held out a peppermint. Amos refused it. She unwrapped it for herself. "You've been walking around him like he insulted your mother." He was used to lure other dogs. Used. He knew they followed him. Mavis chewed slowly. "So?" Amos returned to the hinge. "So he led them to the van." Mavis's voice lost its humor. "Do you think he planned it?" "No." "Do you think he could leave?" "No." "Do you think they fed him when he refused?" Amos drove the screw too deep. The wood cracked. Mavis looked at the split board. "That answer enough for you?" He stood. "You did not see the video." "No, I saw Jasper's tag." Her face tightened. "You think I do not understand what Flint may have been part of." Amos said nothing. Mavis stepped down from the doorway, one hand resting on her curved wooden cane. "If a prisoner is forced to carry a message that gets another prisoner hurt, who do you blame?" "That is not the same." "Why? Because he has 4 legs? Because you need someone alive to blame." The word struck with surgical precision. Amos looked away. Mavis did not stop. "You have blamed the men. Good. You have blamed the market. Fair. You have blamed the town for not noticing. Also fair." She nodded toward Flint. "But he is here. He cannot argue, and he survived." Amos's jaw tightened. Mavis's voice softened. "That last part bothers you most, does it not?" The yard became very quiet. A memory opened before Amos could close it. A shoreline at night, a failed extraction, a radio message cut short, 3 men returning when 5 had gone out. For years, Amos had carried the arithmetic of survival like a debt. He knew what it was to wonder whether coming home had made him guilty of those who did not. He had never called it guilt aloud. Now he had placed the same burden on a dog. Mavis unwrapped another peppermint and placed it in his palm. "For the taste in your mouth," she said. That evening, Amos went to the porch. Boone's old metal bowl sat on a shelf inside the shed where he had moved it weeks earlier. He carried it downstairs to the basement. He did not throw it away. He could not. Instead, he placed it in a wooden crate with Boone's worn collar, the steel whistle, and a photograph from the last winter they had shared. The act did not feel like burial. It felt like making room. Then Amos drove into Clearbell and bought a new bowl. It was plain stainless steel with a heavy rubber base. No name, no military insignia, no resemblance to Boone's. When he returned, Flint remained under the table. Amos filled the bowl and set it near the kitchen wall. Then he sat on the floor several feet away. He did not call Flint. He did not offer food from his hand. He simply waited. The house darkened around them. At last Amos spoke. "Boone does not need replacing." Flint watched him. "And you do not need to become Boone." The dog's eyes remained fixed on Amos's hands. "I saw what they made you do." Amos's voice roughened. "I judged you for surviving it." Flint did not understand the confession. That was not why Amos made it. "I know better." Minutes passed. The heater clicked. Flint flinched, but only once. Then he crawled backward from beneath the table and disappeared into the bedroom. Amos stayed where he was. He assumed the dog had chosen distance. A moment later, Flint returned with something in his mouth, the missing left glove. He stopped beyond Amos's reach. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, Flint placed the glove on the floor, not at Amos's boot, near enough that Amos could take it without entering the dog's space. Amos did not reach immediately. He looked at the worn leather, darkened by oil and years of work. The glove had no value. That was what made it precious. Flint had selected it, carried it, hidden it, and now returned it. No command had produced the gesture. No reward had purchased it. Amos slowly extended one hand and lifted the glove. "Thank you," he said. Flint remained standing. Then, instead of retreating beneath the table, he settled beside the new bowl, not touching Amos, not yet, but facing him. The room stayed quiet. This time the silence did not feel shared. It felt forgiven. By the first week of March, the investigation had acquired names. That did not make it cleaner. Hollis Mercer had traced Wade Barlow's phone records, fuel receipts, and storage payments to 2 men whose businesses appeared respectable from the road. Reese Danton, 56, owned a livestock transport company with 3 trucks, a weathered office, and enough legitimate contracts to hide the illegitimate ones. Milo Rusk, 44, had once worked as a veterinary technician before being dismissed for falsifying medication logs. Reese moved the animals. Milo made the paperwork lie. Wade kept the dogs in cheap storage, fed them only enough to remain sellable, then carried them into seasonal markets with stories prepared in advance. Owner died. Family moved away. Dog became aggressive. Dog was found wandering. Each lie was ordinary enough to avoid curiosity. Hollis laid the structure out in Odessa's office without drama. Colored tabs divided the files in his leather case. Odessa wrote dates in her black notebook. Laurel reviewed medication invoices while Tessa studied the handling notes recovered from Milo's old employment records. Amos stood near the window with Flint beside him. "So arrest them," he said. Hollis adjusted his glasses. "For what we can prove today? You know what they did. I know what the evidence suggests. 7 missing dogs, sedatives, false transfers, and no complete chain tying all 3 men to the same transaction." Amos looked at Odessa. She did not rescue him from the answer. "If we move too early," she said, "they separate, destroy records, and claim Wade acted alone. So we wait. We build." The word irritated Amos because it sounded slow. Slow felt dangerously close to passive. Hollis closed one file. "Wade is a weak link. Weak links are useful only when they believe they still belong to the chain." Amos understood the strategy. He simply hated that understanding required patience. Outside, Clearbell continued as though nothing beneath its snow had changed. The winter market reopened every Saturday. Coffee still steamed from paper cups. Vendors still argued over prices. Dogs still sat in crates while strangers examined their teeth and feet. Some sellers had heard rumors about the warehouse evidence. Most claimed not to know anything. One man told Odessa he had always thought Wade's prices were suspicious. Another admitted he had once seen a dog with a shaved patch near its shoulder and decided it was not his business. A woman who sold farm tools said she had complained about the smell near the storage buildings, but only because it drove customers away. The network had not survived through secrecy alone. It had survived because suspicion was inconvenient. Nora Blevins began working from a long table in the Clearbell library. At 59, she had soft gray curls, dark blue glasses, and the focused patience of someone who considered poor filing a moral failure. She arranged missing animal reports into boxes marked by town, year, and species. Colored tabs protruded from every folder. "Computers are wonderful," she told Amos on his first visit, "until people spell the same dog's name 3 different ways." She held up 3 records: Roscoe, Roscoe, and Roscow. Same shepherd, different offices, no one connected them. Amos looked across the table at the growing piles. "What do you need me to do?" "Drive." Nora handed him a list of addresses. "Take updated statements. Ask for photographs, microchip numbers, unusual markings, old veterinary receipts. Do not promise anyone we will find their animal. I know better than that." Nora looked over her glasses. Grief makes intelligent people hear promises that were never spoken. Amos folded the list into his coat pocket. Flint waited beneath the table, watching Nora's hands as she sorted paper. She slid him no food. She made no attempt to touch him. By the time Amos stood to leave, Flint had moved 6 inches closer to her chair. Their first visit was to Evelyn Marr, a 54-year-old night shift nurse who lived in a narrow blue house near the highway. Her German shepherd, Pepper, had disappeared 2 years earlier. A porch light burned above the door, despite the bright afternoon. "I leave it on when I work nights," Evelyn said. She was tall, tired-eyed, and still wore navy hospital trousers beneath her winter coat. Her hair had been pinned up carelessly, as though sleep and grooming had been negotiating for years. Amos glanced at the light. "You think she might come back while you're gone?" Evelyn's mouth tightened. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like a light." Flint stood near the porch railing. Evelyn looked at the missing edge of his ear, then at the scar along his chest. "Was he stolen?" "We think so." The answer changed her posture. Not hope exactly. Hope was too generous. It was permission to speak without sounding foolish. Evelyn brought out a folder containing photographs, vaccine records, and the receipt for Pepper's microchip registration. She apologized 3 times for saving so much. Amos told her Nora would be pleased. That made Evelyn laugh once, quietly. The next address belonged to Frank Calder, a retired carpenter, whose old collie, Moss, had vanished from beside a feed store. Frank's workshop smelled of cedar and cold iron. Unfinished chair legs stood in one corner. A pair of walking boots sat clean beneath a bench. "I stopped using those after he went missing," Frank said. He was 70, broad-handed, and stooped from decades over work tables. Walking alone felt stupid. Amos almost told him that grief often made ordinary things feel disloyal. Instead, he asked about Moss's collar. Flint wandered toward the boots, sniffed them, then lay down beside the bench. Frank watched him. "That one does not trust much." "No, but he came anyway." Amos looked at Flint. "Yes." At the third house, an older couple named Samuel and June Arnett still kept their dog's red leash hanging beside the door. Neither of them took it down during the interview. Samuel answered most questions. June corrected every date. When Flint settled near the wall, June placed an old photograph on the floor where he could see it without being approached. The picture showed a smiling black Labrador standing in deep snow. Flint sniffed the corner of the photograph and looked away. June did not seem disappointed. "He does not owe me anything," she said. The sentence remained with Amos for the rest of the day. They visited 7 homes that week. Flint found no hidden tags. He led them to no secret buildings. He did nothing that could be turned into a headline. He stood quietly while people described the exact sound of a gate closing, the weather on a missing morning, the final meal left untouched in a kitchen. His scars made their stories easier to tell, not because he represented certainty, because he represented survival without explanation. At the library, Nora entered every detail into a shared county database built from an existing lost animal platform. She scanned photographs, corrected duplicate reports, and linked veterinary records where owners had given consent. Patterns began to appear. Several dogs disappeared within 48 hours of livestock transports passing through the area. 3 had been seen near trucks bearing Danton livestock markings. 2 false vaccination certificates carried serial formats used by the clinic where Milo once worked. It was still not enough. But it was no longer random. Amos began staying out later. He told himself the extra driving was useful. Hollis needed vehicle descriptions. Nora needed statements. Odessa needed dates confirmed. The truth was less flattering. Every completed task gave Amos a temporary sense of being necessary. And necessity felt dangerously similar to purpose. One evening, after leaving Frank Calder's workshop, Amos saw a dark livestock truck pull away from a roadside tavern. Its rear lights matched the spacing in the gas station video. The body was the same dull gray. A partial company name showed beneath the road salt. Dant. Amos's pulse sharpened. He hurried toward the pickup. His keys slipped from his hand and struck the snow. He cursed, bent to retrieve them, and had to brace one palm against the truck bed when the world tilted. Flint stood behind him. Amos straightened too quickly. The truck was already moving toward the county road. "Come on." He opened the driver's door. Flint stepped between him and the cabin. "Move." The dog remained there. Its head was low, but this was not fear. Flint watched Amos's face, then his hand gripping the doorframe. "Flint?" The truck reached the intersection. Amos tried to guide him aside. Flint barked. One hard, abrupt sound. Amos froze. Flint rarely barked. The second bark came louder. Amos's chest fluttered unpleasantly, followed by a hollow pause that made him feel as though the ground had dropped beneath one foot. He lowered himself onto the running board. The truck disappeared. Anger arrived before fear. Damn it! Flint stood in front of him, blocking the wind. Amos wanted to blame the dog for the lost lead. Then he noticed his own hands trembling. Laurel examined him that night at the clinic after Odessa drove them in down. The diagnosis was not dramatic enough to satisfy a man who preferred clear enemies. A mild arrhythmia, exhaustion, cold exposure, too much coffee, not enough food. "You are not dying tonight," Laurel said, removing the blood pressure cuff. "That is not permission to behave like an idiot tomorrow." Amos sat on the examination table with his coat folded beside him. "I could have followed that truck. You could have driven into a ditch. I know how to drive in snow." Laurel stared at him through her round amber glasses. "Your heart does not care about your resume." Across the room, Flint lay near the door, awake. Laurel followed Amos's gaze. "He noticed before you admitted anything was wrong. He blocked the truck. He blocked you." The distinction settled heavily. Hollis arrived 20 minutes later carrying a paper cup he never drank from. When Amos explained what he had seen, Hollis wrote down the location and time. "You should have called. I was going to follow first. That is not your job. My job appears to be sitting still while everyone explains why nothing is enough." Hollis closed his notebook. "This investigation does not need a 76-year-old man proving he can still be useful." Amos's face hardened. Hollis continued before he could answer. "It needs a witness who remains alive long enough to testify. It needs someone people trust enough to open their doors. It needs a foster home for a dog who would not survive another kennel." He glanced at Flint. "You are confusing usefulness with danger." The words were not kind. They were accurate. Amos looked away. For years he had believed usefulness must hurt a little to count. That belief had followed him out of the military, into salvage work, into Boone's final winter, and now into Flint's life. Later that same night, while Amos sat under observation at Laurel's clinic, Odessa received a visitor. Leonard Shaw entered the sheriff's office, smelling faintly of welding smoke and winter air. Lenny was 63, thin through the shoulders, with gray blonde hair cut close, and an old pair of protective goggles pushed up on his forehead. His left eye was clouded from a welding accident. The cuffs of his blue work coat were marked by tiny burn holes. He kept one hand in his breast pocket, fingers closed around a sobriety coin. Odessa recognized him. "So does half the town," Lenny said before she asked. "That is part of the problem." He had seen Wade and Reese moving cages into the storage building after midnight. More than once. He had heard dogs inside. He had also seen Milo arrive with a metal case and leave carrying loose collars in a plastic sack. "Why did you not report it?" Odessa asked. Lenny looked at the floor. "Because I was drinking then. Because Reese knew it. Because I figured nobody would believe me." "That all?" Lenny rubbed the coin between his fingers. "No." He raised his head. "I did not want trouble badly enough to care what the trouble was doing to something else." Odessa remained silent. Lenny swallowed. "I told myself Wade was running some cheap breeding scheme. Told myself the dogs were not my responsibility. Now one of them is walking around town covered in scars." He placed both hands on the desk. "I saw the old man with that shepherd outside the library. The dog looked at me like he knew the smell." Lenny's voice thinned but did not break. "I am not asking you to call me brave. I am asking you to write down what I saw before I find another excuse." Odessa opened her notebook. The next morning, Amos returned home with Flint and strict instructions from Laurel. Rest, medication, no chasing trucks, no pretending age was a personal insult. On the kitchen table lay a message from Odessa asking him to call. Lenny Shaw had given a formal statement. For the first time, someone from inside the silence had chosen to speak. Amos sat down slowly. Flint remained near his knee, not touching. Outside, Clearbell shone beneath fresh snow, beautiful enough to make innocence seem possible. But Amos understood the town differently now. Its deepest wound was not that cruel men had moved through it. Cruel men moved through many places. The wound was how many decent people had noticed pieces of the truth and convinced themselves that silence was harmless. Lenny's testimony would not heal that wound. Neither would Amos's anger. But one man had finally admitted that fear did not excuse what his silence had protected. Amos rested his hand near Flint's shoulder without touching the scar. Perhaps that was how a town began to change. Not when everyone declared themselves good, when someone finally became honest about the moment they had chosen not to be. The final winter market of the season opened under a sky too beautiful for what Hollis Mercer intended to do there. Sunlight spilled through broken clouds and struck the snow on the booth roofs until the whole market seemed made of glass. Country music drifted from a small wooden stage. Vendors poured coffee into paper cups. Children were absent from the grounds by county rule that morning, and older farmers argued cheerfully over the price of chains, tools, and feed. Nothing in the scene looked criminal. That was what made it useful. Hollis had spent 6 days building the operation. A county investigator named Dana Cross, 42, would pose as a buyer looking for an adult German Shepherd with no interest in pedigree or clean paperwork. Dana had a weathered face, short dark hair, and the relaxed posture of someone who could wait through a lie without interrupting it. She had worked livestock fraud cases before and knew how to sound careless without becoming vague. Using a number recovered from the broken phone, Dana contacted Milo Rusk and told him she needed a guard dog quickly. She said she did not want questions. She said the dog did not need perfect papers. Milo replied within an hour. That answer was not enough for an arrest. It was enough for a meeting. Odessa placed plainclothes deputies near the main gate, the equipment row, and the service road behind the storage buildings. Ruth waited with 2 animal control officers and transport crates in case dogs were found. Laurel remained at a mobile veterinary station parked beyond the market fence. Amos disliked every part of the plan that did not involve him, Hollis noticed. "You are not making contact with Milo," he said, while they stood beside Amos's pickup before the market opened. "I know." "You are not approaching Reese." "I know." "You are not following any vehicle." Amos looked at him. "You enjoying this?" "A little." Odessa, standing nearby with her green scarf tucked beneath her coat, closed her notebook. His role is observation. He knows the trucks, the storage layout, and Wade's habits. Hollis nodded. "And if any of them recognize him, he becomes a liability." Amos adjusted the carpenter's pencil behind his ear. "I have been called worse. Not by anyone trying to keep you alive." Flint stood beside the pickup in his olive-quilted coat and dark leather collar. Tessa had objected to bringing him, not because she believed Flint would behave dangerously, but because the market itself contained too many old triggers, metal cages, truck doors, unfamiliar dogs, and men whose scents might belong to his past. Amos had nearly agreed to leave him home. Then Hollis explained that Flint might recognize a vehicle or person before Amos did. Tessa agreed only after setting conditions. Flint would remain on a long line. He would never be used to approach a suspect. He would have a quiet retreat behind Amos's truck. And the first sign that Flint could not recover from stress would end his participation. "No heroics," Tessa told Amos. "From me or him. Especially from you." The market filled quickly. Amos moved through the outer rows as if inspecting scrap. He paused at tables of rusted wrenches, stove parts, and old tack, while watching the service road through gaps between booths. Flint walked close but not at heel. That distinction mattered now. He no longer moved beside Amos because a command held him there. He chose the distance, sometimes drifting several feet away to smell the snow beneath a truck or study another dog from across the aisle. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Dana stood near a livestock trailer with a red travel mug in one hand. A hidden microphone beneath her scarf carried her conversation to Hollis, Odessa, and the recording unit inside an unmarked van. Milo arrived first. Amos recognized him from surveillance photographs. He was smaller than expected, narrow through the shoulders, with black hair combed too carefully backward. His gray olive coat was spotless despite the mud, and he carried a metal document case close to his side. Milo did not bring a dog. He brought papers. That made Amos uneasy. The market noise continued around them. A man tested a chainsaw near the far fence. Someone laughed at the coffee stand. A vendor rang a brass bell to announce a reduced price on snow shovels. Dana and Milo spoke beside the trailer. Amos could not hear them directly. Hollis's voice came softly through the earpiece hidden beneath Amos's knit cap. He says the animal is nearby. A minute later, a gray livestock truck turned onto the service road. Salt and mud covered most of the lettering on its side, but Amos could still read enough. Danton Livestock Transport. Flint saw the truck before Amos did. The dog stopped so abruptly that the long line slid through Amos's glove. His head lowered. The muscles along his back tightened beneath the coat. One foreleg began to tremble. Amos looked toward the cab. Reese Danton sat behind the wheel. His heavy shoulders filled the dark coat he wore. A close gray-blond beard covered his jaw, and the old cut through his left eyebrow remained visible even at a distance. Reese turned his head toward the market. Flint stepped backward. Amos felt the instinct to shorten the line, to hold the dog close, to prove they could stand there together. Instead, he remembered Tessa's voice. Choice builds trust. Amos guided Flint behind the pickup, where the vehicle blocked the truck from view. He did not pull the dog into place. He simply moved first and left the line loose. Flint followed. Behind the truck, the music sounded farther away. The snow there remained mostly untouched, clean except for tire tracks and boot prints. Amos crouched with his back against the steel toolbox. "You can leave," he said quietly. Flint paced once to the end of the line. Beyond that distance lay the open gate to the fenced rest area Tessa had arranged. Ruth waited there. Flint could retreat. No one would stop him. He looked toward the gate, then back toward Amos. For a long moment the dog stood between the two directions. Amos did not call. At last Flint turned away from the gate and sat beside the rear wheel, not pressed against Amos, not hiding behind him. Beside him. The decision felt larger because no one had demanded it. Through the earpiece, Hollis said, "The dog is out." Amos rose enough to look through the truck windows. Reese had opened the rear compartment of the livestock truck. Dana stood several yards away while Milo displayed documents from his case. A German shepherd emerged on a short lead. The dog was female, heavy through the middle, with dull black and tan fur and a white scar across one hind leg. She looked healthy enough from a distance, which Amos knew meant very little. Dana studied the papers. "These vaccination dates don't match," she said. Milo gave a small shrug. "Clinic error. And there's no microchip number. Some buyers prefer that." Dana lifted her red mug. "I prefer not having a county office call me in 6 months." Milo leaned closer. His voice remained low, but the microphone caught it. "For another 300, the records can be corrected." "Corrected how?" "Clean owner history, new vaccination sheet, chip entry if you want one." "What if the old chip comes up?" Milo smiled. "Then we make sure nobody looks for it." Hollis said one word into the channel. "Enough." Odessa's deputies moved. 2 approached Milo from the equipment row. Another pair closed on Reese's truck from the service road. Dana stepped backward, clearing the line. Milo's expression collapsed before anyone touched him. Reese reacted differently. He slammed the rear door, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. The truck lurched forward. For 3 seconds, Amos saw the old pattern returning. The van in the grainy video, the gate, Flint backing toward metal. Then a county snowplow pulled across the service road. Odessa had positioned it there for exactly that purpose. Reese braked hard. Deputies surrounded the cab. There was no chase, no heroic collision, only a heavy vehicle trapped by a larger plan. Reese stepped down with both hands visible, fury held behind a face that had likely intimidated people. For years. This time, the market watched. People stopped bargaining. Music continued playing from the stage, absurdly cheerful. Ruth and Laurel entered the rear compartment after the truck was secured. They found 2 dogs. Both had microchips. Both had active missing animal reports. One had disappeared 9 months earlier from a ranch outside Bellwether. The other had been missing nearly a year. The truck also contained veterinary sedatives without matching prescriptions, tools used to remove identification tags, several blank transfer forms, and 2 phones, not the entire case, enough to widen it. Wade appeared from behind a row of equipment trailers just as Milo was placed in handcuffs. He wore the same stained parka and black knit cap Amos remembered from the first morning. His walk was unsteady, but his eyes were clear enough to understand what he was seeing. He turned immediately. Amos moved before thinking. Not quickly. His knee would not allow quickly. But he knew the gap between 2 parked trailers, and he reached it before Wade did. Wade stopped. For 1 second, the market disappeared. There was only Amos, Wade, and Flint standing several feet behind on the loose line. Wade's gaze dropped to the dog. "That thing," he said, "should have put it down when I had the chance." Amos felt anger rise. Old anger, simple anger, the kind that offered the body a clean solution. Wade looked at Amos's hands, perhaps expecting a fist. Amos kept them at his sides. "Every scar on him was photographed," Amos said. Wade's mouth twisted. "Good for you." Every payment was recorded, every storage receipt, every false paper. Wade looked toward the officers closing in behind Amos. "You think that makes you some kind of hero?" "No." Amos stepped aside, leaving the path open for Odessa. "It makes you documented." Odessa took Wade into custody. The moment carried no triumph, only the dull finality of a door closing properly at last. Then metal struck the ground. A small whistle had slipped from Reese's coat while a deputy searched him. It hit the packed snow and gave a sharp 2-note cry. Flint bolted. The long line ripped across Amos's glove. Flint reached the end so hard the harness twisted against his chest. His paws clawed at the snow, body low, eyes fixed on nothing visible. People turned. A few stepped closer. "Back up!" Tessa shouted from across the service road. Amos moved toward the whistle first, not toward Flint. He placed his boot over the metal and stopped it from rolling beneath a vehicle. Then he raised one hand to Odessa. "Evidence!" She understood and signaled a deputy to bag it. Only after the whistle was secured did Amos turn toward Flint. The dog had backed against the side of a trailer. His breathing came in shallow bursts. The line stretched tight between them. Amos did not shorten it. He lowered himself to one knee several yards away. His joints protested. He ignored them. He did not say, "Come." He did not say, "Stay." He did not repeat soothing words until they became another form of pressure. He said only one thing. "Flint?" The dog's ears moved. Around them the market had gone unnaturally quiet. Amos heard the flag rope tapping against a pole. A dog whined from inside Ruth's transport vehicle. Somewhere near the stage, the song ended. "Flint?" The shepherd looked toward him, not at his hands, at his face. The line remained tight. Amos waited. Minutes passed. Flint took one step sideways, then another. Not toward Amos yet, away from the trailer wall. His breathing began to lengthen. Tessa remained at the edge of the scene, ready but silent. No one tried to touch him. Flint lowered his head and sniffed the snow. The ordinary action felt like a door opening. At last, he walked forward until the line sagged between them. He stopped beyond Amos's reach. Amos did not close the remaining distance. Flint chose it. The dog stepped closer and placed one shoulder against the old man's olive coat. Amos rested his hand in the air above Flint's back, waiting. When Flint did not pull away, Amos let his palms settle lightly against the fur. The contact lasted only a moment. It was enough. Behind them, deputies continued searching the truck. Milo sat in a patrol vehicle staring at his knees. Reese watched from the roadside, his face hard with the disbelief of a man discovering that fear no longer belonged exclusively to him. The winter sun remained bright. Coffee cooled in abandoned cups. People began speaking again, first in whispers, then in full voices. The market had not transformed into a better place in one morning. Some witnesses would deny what they had seen. Some vendors would complain that the arrests had damaged business. Some would insist they had always suspected something. But 2 missing dogs had been found alive. Milo had offered to falsify records on tape. Reese had been stopped with evidence in his truck. Wade had been arrested before he could disappear into another excuse. Later, faced with transport records, photographs, and Lenny Shaw's statement, Wade began bargaining. He provided locations of other holding sites and names of buyers in exchange for consideration from the prosecutor. Hollis accepted the information without promising mercy. Amos stood beside the pickup while Ruth loaded the rescued dogs into warmed crates. Flint remained near him. The dog still watched every truck door. He still startled when metal clanged. Nothing had been erased. But when the whistle sounded, the past had ordered him to run. This time, he had stopped. Not because Amos commanded him, not because fear released him, because somewhere between the cage, the cabin, the market, and the long silences they had shared, Flint had learned that terror could speak without being obeyed, and Amos had learned that protection did not always mean standing between a creature and danger. Sometimes it meant leaving enough room for that creature to choose its own way back. The searches began before dawn. Using the evidence recovered from Reese Danton's truck, the recorded transaction with Milo Rusk, and the locations Wade provided through his attorney, Odessa and Hollis secured warrants for 4 properties across the county. One was a warehouse behind an abandoned feed mill. Another was a livestock trailer parked beneath a highway overpass. The third was a rented storage building registered under a false business name. The last was an old ranch where the house had been empty for years, but fresh tire tracks crossed the snow behind the barn. They found dogs in all 4 places. Some barked until they lost their voices. Some remained pressed to the backs of cages even after the doors opened. One old retriever walked directly into Ruth Delaney's arms and refused to lift its head. Others had become so quiet that Laurel Fenwick checked their breathing before attempting to move them. There was no single triumphant rescue scene. There were forms, photographs, microchip scans, warm blankets, water offered in shallow bowls. Owners called in the middle of work shifts and told not to drive too quickly on frozen roads. One cattle dog was reunited with a rancher who dropped to his knees in the parking lot and forgot every word he had planned to say. A black Labrador recognized June Arnett by the sound of her cane striking the clinic floor and nearly pulled a technician off balance trying to reach her. Several dogs had already been transferred across state lines. For some, the trail ended at false names and disconnected numbers. For others, the people who had once waited were no longer alive. Amos helped where he could. He repaired 2 damaged kennel latches at the county center. He transported blankets from the church basement. He drove Mavis to the clinic when Jasper's records were reviewed, though no living match had yet been found. He did not enter the holding rooms unless asked. He had finally learned that being present did not require standing in the middle of everything. Flint stayed at home during the searches. Too many cages, too many smells, too much of a past no one had the right to make him revisit. 3 weeks after the arrests, Hollis came to Amos's cabin carrying a thin folder. He remained standing near the kitchen table while Flint watched from beside the stove. "We found the original registration attached to his chip," Hollis said. Amos did not ask whose. The answer had been waiting inside him since Laurel first heard the scanner chirp beneath Flint's chest. Hollis opened the folder. "Marion Sloan, former State Park Ranger, 72. Lives outside Lander, Wyoming." Amos looked down at Flint. The dog's amber eyes followed the movement of his hands. "He was registered under another name," Hollis continued. "What name?" "Ranger." The word entered the room gently. Flint did not react. Amos did. He had known Flint for only a few months, not long enough to claim a lifetime, long enough for the thought of losing him to change the shape of the kitchen. "Is she alive?" "Yes." "Did she report him missing?" Hollis placed several photocopies on the table. Police report, veterinary records, photographs. In one, a younger Flint stood beside a woman in a green Park Service jacket. Both his ears were whole. His coat was thick. His eyes held none of the guarded distance Amos had come to recognize. "He disappeared during a break-in 4 years ago," Hollis said. "She searched for months. Then she suffered a mild stroke and moved closer to her sister." Amos stared at the photograph. There was no cruelty in it. No chain, no cage. Only a dog standing beside someone who had clearly loved him. That was worse. A cruel owner would have made everything simple. A loving one meant Amos had no villain to resist. Marion came to Clearbell the following week. Tessa arranged the meeting at the County Rehabilitation Center in a quiet room connected to a fenced yard. Amos arrived first with Flint and sat near the far wall. When Marion entered, she did not look like someone walking toward a miracle. She looked afraid. She was tall and slender, with long white hair tied low beneath an old ranger hat. Her right hand moved more slowly than her left, and one corner of her mouth rested slightly lower from the stroke. Around her neck hung a pair of compact binoculars. She stopped inside the doorway. Flint lifted his head. Marion did not move closer. "Ranger," she said. The name was barely louder than breath. Flint stood. His body became still, though not in the way it had around Reese. His ears angled forward, then back. He took one step and stopped. Marion's eyes filled. She did not kneel. She did not open her arms. "I know," she whispered. "You don't have to." Flint remained several yards away. Amos felt his own hand tighten around the edge of the chair. He wanted Flint to remember. He wanted Flint not to remember. Both wishes shamed him. Marion lowered her left hand and turned her palm outward. Flint approached by inches. He stopped twice. Once he retreated. No one encouraged him. No one called him brave. At last he leaned forward and touched his nose to Marion's fingers. Her breath broke. She closed her eyes, but did not reach for his collar. "Hello, old friend," she said. Flint stepped back. Marion let him. That restraint told Amos more about her than any ownership record could. The meetings continued over the next 2 weeks. Sometimes Flint approached Marion quickly. Sometimes he stayed beside Amos. Once he carried a canvas glove from Marion's bag and placed it near the door, then refused to come close for the rest of the session. Tessa treated every response as information rather than betrayal. Marion told Amos about Ranger as a young dog. He had loved snowshoe trails and hated shallow water. He had once stolen an entire loaf of bread from a ranger station and hidden half of it beneath a visitor map. Amos almost laughed. Flint had apparently been stealing inconvenient objects long before Amos's gloves. Marion smiled when he told her. For a few minutes, they were not two people quietly measuring who had the greater claim. They were simply two people who had been loved by the same dog at different moments of his life. The legal question remained. Marion was Flint's rightful owner. Amos was his current foster caregiver. Neither love nor loneliness changed those facts. On the final supervised visit, Marion sat with Amos outside the fenced yard while Flint explored the melting snow. "I imagined this differently," she said. "So did I. I thought he would see me and become who he was." Amos watched Flint pause near a pine stump. "He cannot." "No." Marion's right hand rested stiffly in her lap. "I could take him home. I have the legal right." Amos said nothing. His chest felt tight, though not from the arrhythmia this time. Marion looked toward him. "But I do not think the old life is waiting for him in Wyoming. I think I am." The distinction was painful because Amos understood it. He had gone to the market looking for Boone. Marion had come to Clearbell looking for Ranger. Flint had survived both names. "He sleeps now," Amos said. Marion nodded. "I saw." "He still startles at truck doors." "I saw that too. He steals my left glove. That has always been his criminal weakness." This time Amos did laugh. Marion smiled through tears. Then she handed him a signed transfer document. "This is not me giving him away. I know. It is me refusing to make him leave safety because I miss what we had." Amos accepted the papers with both hands. Before leaving, Marion placed an old brass tag in his palm. Ranger. The letters were worn but readable. Amos did not attach it to Flint's collar. At home, he placed it in the wooden box beside Boone's collar and the old steel whistle. Not hidden, not displayed. Kept. Two histories allowed to exist without fighting for the same space. The town council meeting took place 10 days later. The chamber was too small for the crowd. Market vendors stood along the walls. Pet owners filled the front rows. Several people complained that the arrests had damaged Clearbell's reputation. One man said mandatory microchip scans would slow business. Another claimed the market should not be punished for the crimes of 3 men. Mavis rose with her cane and said, "Then decent sellers should not object to proving they are decent." Lenny Shaw spoke next. He admitted publicly that he had seen cages moved at night and remained silent. The room changed after that. Not completely, but enough. Laurel explained the veterinary requirements. Ruth described how injured animals could be screened without shutting down legitimate sales. Nora presented the database she had built from existing county systems. Odessa spoke last and refused to describe regulation as an insult to honest people. The vote passed by 1. From then on, every animal transferred at the market required identification records and a microchip scan. Visible injuries triggered inspection. Suspicious transactions could be suspended immediately. Missing animal records would be shared among participating clinics and nearby towns. There was no grand foundation, no shining new building. Nora ran a county hotline from a desk beside the library's history section. Laurel and 3 other clinics offered free chip scans twice a month. Amos cleaned out the smaller workshop beside his cabin and converted it into an emergency overnight shelter for lost dogs during winter storms. Someone painted a sign for the door. "Safe until morning." Amos thought it sounded sentimental. He hung it anyway. Near the end of March, Tessa invited Amos and Flint to the fenced meadow behind the rehabilitation center. The snow had begun to retreat from the grass. Water shone in shallow tracks beneath the pines. The air smelled of wet earth and the first hint of spring. Flint stood on a long line. Tessa checked the gate. Then she nodded to Amos. He unclipped the lead. Flint did not move at first. Amos stepped backward. There was no command, no food in his hand, no whistle waiting in his pocket. Flint walked away slowly, then broke into a run. He crossed the meadow with his uneven tail lifted, throwing wet snow behind him. He rolled in the grass, sneezed, and rose, looking mildly offended by his own happiness. Amos laughed. Flint ran farther. He stopped near the tree line and stared into the pines. Amos felt the old fear, not that Flint would be harmed, that Flint might discover freedom and decide Amos was unnecessary. He let the fear remain his own. Minutes passed. Then Flint turned. He did not race back. He wandered, sniffed a patch of ground, circled once, and eventually returned to sit one step away from Amos. Amos did not reach for him. Flint closed the distance himself and leaned his shoulder against the old man's leg. Tessa looked away, granting them privacy. Weeks later, Amos and Flint traveled into Clearbell with the small salvage trailer rattling behind the pickup. They stopped near the roadside to collect several pieces of broken fencing. Flint seized a short wooden board and carried it in the wrong direction. "Other way, Bio," Amos called. Flint continued proudly toward a snowbank. Amos followed, laughing hard enough that he had to steady himself against the trailer. A truck door slammed across the road. Flint flinched. His head dropped. Then he looked at Amos, breathed once, and returned to the board. Nothing was erased. At night, Amos still dreamed of Boone. Flint still sometimes woke at the sound of metal, but Flint no longer slept with both eyes open, and the empty bowl no longer waited on the porch. Amos hung Boone's old bowl beneath the pine tree behind the cabin, where winter light could collect inside it. Flint's new bowl remained in the warm kitchen, usually surrounded by crumbs and the occasional stolen glove. Amos had not replaced Boone. Marion had not recovered Ranger. They had both loved a dog who had crossed through different lives and emerged with the right to choose what came next. Flint had not found a new owner. He had found a man who finally understood that loyalty was not proven by obedience, possession, or return. Sometimes loyalty was simply this: a gate left open inside a place made safe, a man who did not call, and a dog who came back anyway. Sometimes healing does not mean getting back what was lost. Sometimes it means making room for a new kind of love without asking it to become the old one. Amos never replaced Boone, and Flint never returned to the dog he had once been. Yet together they found something just as precious, a safe place to begin again. Perhaps that is one of God's quietest gifts, the peace that comes when we stop forcing life to look as it once did and trust that grace can still meet us in a different form. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May peace find its way into every place in your life that still feels empty.